stories. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. So the only real textbook we have for this class is this booklet that I put together on timelines and site descriptions on the geography of Israel. So if you would each one take one, if you're going on the tour, and I think there's enough. I've got 25 of them. That should be enough for everyone to have one. There we go. Now the other thing that I'm going to pass out here is just a very simple unmarked line map of Israel. This will just be to take notes on and to follow along as we're going. So pass it back. This one passed along. Okay, so we have a total of actually 38 people right now who are signed up to go on this tour, which is the largest tour I've ever taken. In fact, that's about 10 more than the largest group I've ever had. I had 28 one year. So I'm very excited about this. It's going to be a well-attended tour. It's going to be great. With a larger number, that means we get one of the bigger buses, which is they're nice and more comfortable. And we're going to have a wonderful time on this tour. This class is given because the first time I went to Israel, I thought that as a seminary graduate and a pastor in a school, that I had a pretty good grasp on the history and geography of Israel. And I was just totally blown away by how much information was being thrown at me, and I just couldn't quite absorb it all. And it was on a little shorter tour than the one we're taking, 10 days, which is a typical tour of Israel. Most of the tours you read about are either 7 days or 10 days. And we saw the whole country, and it just went by so fast. And I was blessed, tremendously blessed, when I just thought, man, life, I wish I'd done a little more homework before I went. And I determined then and there, that was before I was teaching at the Bible College, but that if I ever had the opportunity, I would love to take students to the Holy Land before they got into ministry, while they were still in school, because it would be such a tremendous aid to learning. And then not only would I like to take them at that time, but that I would precede it with a series of classes to equip them for what they're about to see. So what I hope to accomplish here is to give you kind of a broad, general grasp of the layout of the land, okay, the geography, where things are located, what the major areas are, so that when we're traveling, you kind of know what you're looking at. You can associate one thing with another area, you know, whether you're in the north or you're in the south or whatever. Because right here around home, it's pretty easy. You can look around. If you're in Reading, look for Mount Shasta, and you know which way north is. But when you're on the other side of the globe and you don't know anything, sometimes you don't know which way is up or down. You're just not sure. So having a general idea about the layout of the land really helps from day to day, so that you know what you're looking at and what you're seeing. And then something about the time frames. Here in America, if something's a couple hundred years old, that's pretty old. And so we have people, archaeologists and historians, that get pretty excited about finding stuff from the Civil War or from America's War for Independence, or if you even get to pre-Columbian times, wow, that's really old. Well, that is nothing in terms of the Middle East. 200 years is like yesterday in the Middle East. So we are going to be looking at things that are 1,500 years old, 2,000 years old, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. And to keep track of all these different layers of civilization in different times can be really challenging. So if you don't have at least a little bit of a refresher course before you go, to give you some kind of framework to hang all these dates on, it can be almost overwhelming. But there have been so many different civilizations over the years that have been in the land of Israel that it's almost mind-boggling. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish in this class, to kind of get us all prepared and ready on the same page, so when we hit the ground, we're going to hit the ground pretty much running. We're going to start seeing things, and you'll be able to associate those with places and dates, and then just soak it all in and learn. And you'll be amazed at how much your understanding and knowledge of the Bible really comes alive based on what you're seeing over there. So most of us in this room are going to be on the tour. There are quite a few that are coming on the tour that are not here tonight, and some will not join us until we actually see them in Israel. We have a number of folks from Oregon that are coming. We have some from really various parts of the country that are going to be joining us. And so some of them are going to be following us on the live feed or on YouTube later on. Others are going to be going to Israel about a week before we do and spending some time just kind of relaxing and getting acclimated to the climate and the area and so forth, and getting over jet lag. You and I, most of us, we're going to get there and just have to deal with jet lag for the first few days. And we'll have some tips that will help you with some of that. The planes have also gotten a lot nicer in the last few years, helping you deal with jet lag on those long trips. But we'll see how all that goes. But we have a number of people that are going to be all traveling together. But those of us in this room tonight, some of us know each other, some of us don't. So I thought it might be nice just to kind of have everybody, give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. And what I'd like you to do is tell us your name, tell us where you live. Have you been to Israel before? For some, this might be a second or whatever, third trip. If you have been to Israel, tell us when you went. And if you have not, tell us why are you interested in going? What are you really looking forward to? Okay, your name, where you're from, have you been to Israel? If so, when? If not, what are you really looking forward to? We'll start right there. Then you're on the front row, Hallie. So tell everybody who you are, Hallie.
Okay. Hi, I'm Hallie Reed. I live here in Reading, but I was born and raised in Michigan. And I have not been to Israel before. I am interested in going to see where Jesus walked and get a better view of it, and maybe even get a better understanding of how the Jewish people are living their lives today. And I'm really excited about standing where Jesus will stand when he comes back.
Amen. Yeah, great.
I think that's what all of us would say, is being where Jesus was alive and walked. I'm Kathy Huff. I'm Diana's mom. We live up in Montgomery Creek up towards Vernon.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have never been.
I've never been. Okay.
I'm Diana. I think you all know me. I have not been to Israel, and I don't think I can actually pinpoint what I'm looking forward to the most.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's pretty much a package deal.
Yep. Okay.
I'm Terry Huff. I've never been to Israel. I always wanted to be able to, see some of the places spoken of in the Bible, make them more real.
Great. And I just might add that Terry and Kathy's other son, Jeremy, went on our very first tour from Shasta Bible College, and I don't remember the year. Do you know?
Well, let's see. That was probably like maybe 2000.
Yeah, something like that.
About that.
That was our first tour from the Bible College, and I had been once before that to Israel. And so it's a real thrill to have you folks coming, and Diana, we're really looking forward to that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Alvin Hennessy, my wife Cynthia. I'll be going with Christiana and my other daughter, Cherry, and just looking forward to spending time with them, and hope to hear the trumpet sound while we're there.
All right. You know, of all the times I've been, I went many times without my wife. Fortunately, I was able to take my kids a lot of those times. And so I went with one son without my wife, the other son without my wife, and one of my daughters without my wife. But my wife, thankfully, has been able to go with me several times. So it's always neat to go with.
She gets to go this time?
Yeah, she's here, and you'll hear from her in just a moment. But it's great to go with your kids. It's such a tremendous and exciting thing to happen. So thank you, Alvin.
I'm Christiana, and I've never been to Israel. I've worked in Bernie.
Yeah.
I've never been.
Okay.
I'll just introduce.
Okay,
back
yes,
here.
please,
We have
thank you.
Matthew, he's the youngest in my family. Charity, she'll be going with us to Israel. Amy, William, Sharon, Joshua.
All right, very good. So then let's go back this way, starting with you,
My
Dan.
name is Dan Brown. I live here in Reading. I've never been to Israel. I just want to go and see and touch some truth. See where it all happened.
Okay.
My hand the strength of me.
Yeah, Dan wanted to come last time, 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and was all set and ready to go, and then had our car problem, financial difficulties, and all kind of fell apart. But you know, God works all things together for good, and there's a reason why you're going this year, not the last time. We may not know what that is, but God knows, and I'm just really, really excited to have you coming, Dan. Okay.
I'm Jen Gunn, and this will be my 4th trip to Israel, and you all are going to love it. It's amazing.
Okay.
I'm Courtney Gunn, and I went to, I'm from Reading, obviously. And and I went to Israel when I was 16, and I'm really excited to go back again.
Yeah. All right.
I'm Matthew King, and I'm from Dallas, Oregon, I guess. Just Falls City, technically. Nobody knows where that is. Except for that, of course. And I've never been to Israel. I'm not sure exactly how I can pinpoint, per se, where or what I'm excited, but last semester I took Tom Meyer's class on Israel, and it whet my appetite enough to really just kind of give me a thrill and an excitement for the land, for where the stories happen, where things transpired, and just, I think, to be able to, kind of like what Dan said, just to be there, you know, and be able to see, will really change my experience of the Bible.
Good.
I'm Ben Smith, and I'm also from Falls City, Oregon, although I'm currently living on campus. And I've not been to Israel before. Really looking forward to just gaining a better understanding of the world of the Bible. Really, yeah, just excited to see how that'll affect how I read Scripture from here on out.
Wonderful. And now your sister is also planning on coming, isn't that right? You want to tell us a little bit about her? Be nice.
She lives in Klamath Falls. Yeah, she lives in Klamath Falls. She had never gone before, but is super excited to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's super neat for brother and sister to get to go, and we're looking forward to that. Yeah. Okay. Let me come now to some of the particulars about the class itself for those taking it for credit. I just want to go over the syllabus real quickly. Here on so for those that are not taking this for college credit, listen to as much of this as you want to. But for those that are taking it for credit, you need to know what's going on here. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing. If you're in the class, you can access the syllabus in Populi. Here's some contact information. Anybody that needs to contact me, you can call my office number here at 530-221-4275, and I'm extension 25. You can always send me an email to ggunn@shasta.edu. So that's pretty easy to remember. I want to go through the course description, though. And I kind of described this to you at the beginning of our session this evening, but this is a study of the history and geography of the land of Israel with a focus on the following. Number one, the major historical and archaeological eras of the land of Israel, from early Bronze Age to the present. So early Bronze Age, we're looking at some of the earliest times. What we'll find is there's different ways of thinking about the eras of the Bible. There are archaeological eras the archaeologists all speak of. They speak of Stone Age, and even before that, a Stone Age and a Copper Age and a Bronze Age, an Iron Age, and so forth. And there are dates, theoretical dates, that are associated with these different ages. When it gets to the ages for the dates of all these things, there's serious disagreement. So my position is a very conservative biblical position. I accept, young dates for most everything. Many archaeologists and historians want to extend some of these dates way, way back because they're building on an evolutionary kind of a presupposition. So what we'll do is we'll see both of these dating schemes, but I just want to let you know that there are sometimes differences of opinion between conservative biblical scholars versus your secular archaeologists, especially. Okay, so but beginning with the early Bronze Age up till the present, that's really what we're going to cover. Then we'll also take a look at the geographical and geological features of the land. We'll take a look at some of that tonight, and a description of the key cities and villages of the land of Israel. Now you'll find in the little booklet that you have, there are a list of significant cities and villages in Israel, and the description of each of those. And you can look at that now if you want to. We'll go through a number of those, not all of them, but we'll go through a number of them. And if you want to, you're welcome to take these booklets along with you on the tour, because we'll be going over some of the stuff in class, and you might want to have that with you. So, a description of key cities and villages, both in biblical times and modern times. So the class meets for 6 weeks of lecture and concludes with a lab consisting of a 10 to 14-day tour of the land of Israel. 14 days in total, but we've got a day of travel on each side, basically. Okay, so attendance, make sure you come to class if you're taking it for credit. We're going to skip over that. I want to talk about the rationale, and again, I touched on this briefly, but I just want to go through the way I've written this up, the reason for doing this. And I asked those of you who introduced yourselves to give us a little bit of an idea about why would you like to go to Israel. That's a good question. This last year, Israel recorded record number of tourists ever to visit the land of Israel. And lots of people want to go to Israel, and they have lots of different reasons. Christians obviously want to go to Israel to visit the places where Jesus ministered. They want to walk where Jesus walked. Jews want to visit Israel because it might be that they're interested in their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they want to see where Abraham walked. They want to walk where Abraham walked. It might be that they have more nationalistic or Zionistic motivations, and maybe they're really caught up in the nationalistic fervor of the modern state of Israel. They want to see the political areas. Then you find Roman Catholics. Lots of tours of Israel are Roman Catholic. And in Catholicism, there is a doctrine of pilgrimage that has to do with, basically, with earning favor with God. It's part of the whole sacramental system. And there are holy places that are places where you can go and pray to the saints associated with those holy places, and your prayer actually counts more than if you were, say, here in America. The Catholic tourists tend to like to visit sites that have churches, some of them very elaborate churches. And that's one of the things that will distinguish that kind of a tour from ours. A very Zionistic site tour is going to want to visit especially a lot of the modern lands, some of the sites of famous battles from the wars of 1948, 1967, 1970s, and so on. So different people have different reasons for wanting to visit Israel. Israel is one of the leading innovators in today's world of technology and agriculture. So you find a lot of people want to go over there and visit farms because they want to see what is it that Israel is doing to turn this wasteland into such an abundant farmland. Or what are they doing with technology? And there are some tremendous technological sites there. Intel, Microsoft, all these big high-tech companies all have big high-rise buildings in the big important cities. Medicine. There are medical tours that go to Israel. There's all kinds of different reasons. But as Bible students, we have our own reasons. And the reasons for going will kind of shape our tour. So here's the rationale, the way that I've written it up. A proper interpretation of the Bible is dependent to a large degree on the interpreter's understanding of the cultural, historical, and geographical context in which both the events and the writing of the Bible took place. So, if you're reading about, let's say, David and Goliath. So we know that David fought Goliath somewhere. What was it like? When this little boy stood up against this enormous giant, what was the setting like? How did he get there from Bethlehem? How far was that to travel? And how long did it take him to get there? Well, by being there and seeing those sites, you have something of a geographical context that helps you to understand that account. So, cultural, historical, and geographical context. There's both the events of the Bible, things like the contest between David and Goliath, and the writing of the Bible. So you have the event that took place, and at some later time, somebody wrote that down in Scripture. So what were the circumstances around the writing of that event? And some of the things that we see will help us to get a picture of that kind of a context. Then, many Christians are unaware of either the general layout of biblical lands or the specific geographical, geological makeup of key biblical sites. An understanding of such features will greatly enhance students' ability properly to interpret the Bible. So we've just all been through the Christmas season, right? And everybody here is probably familiar with, if you don't know it by the title, with what I call postcard theology. Okay, a lot of our understanding of the Bible comes from these Christmas postcards. So we all know that at the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, there were 3 kings. How do we know that? We know that from Christmas cards. Does it say that in the Bible? No, of course. And most people here already know that one. Okay, we don't know that there were 3 of them. They weren't kings. They were wise men or magi, and they probably were there about 2 years later. But, the Christmas cards tell us that. Another thing, the Christmas cards all tell us that Mary traveled to Bethlehem on a donkey, right? All the cards say that. They all show her riding on a donkey. Does the Bible say that? No, it doesn't tell how she got there. And so we have these images in our mind of what's in the Bible. And sometimes they come from Bible story books that we've read to our kids or that we had read to us as a child. Sometimes they come from Christmas cards. All these images, sometimes they just come from the pictures that we find in our Sunday school curriculum at church or whatever. How accurate are those pictures, those images that we have in our head? And how frequently do those images that we have in our mind influence the way we are understanding the Scriptures? Well, to be there to see the real thing, I guarantee will give you a little different idea about many of the Bible stories and Bible accounts that we are looking at. Okay, course objectives. At the conclusion of the class, here's what the student should be able to do. There are 5 bullet points. Number 1, you should be able to identify on a map of Israel, and I've given you all these maps of Israel with the line drawings. You should be able to identify on a map of Israel the following geographical features. The major mountains and mountain groups. We'll probably go over that tonight. Major bodies of water, both seas and lakes. Major water courses, these are rivers and brooks, and then the valleys and deserts. Okay, so Matthew, you already gave away something. You said you took Tom Meyer's class, so you don't have any excuse for a poor grade on this, because you should know it all. I'm just kidding you a little bit. Okay. Secondly, identify on a map of Israel the location of key cities. Okay, the key cities. Not all the cities, but there are some key ones that you should know about. And we'll talk about a few different ones each week. Thirdly, reproduce the dates of the major historical and archaeological eras and name the ruling peoples in each era. Fourthly, relate key biblical events to the location and era in which they occurred. And fifthly, you should be able to walk on water in the Sea of Galilee. So, the final exam for this course will take place when we take our boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. We get halfway out into the sea, and I ask the students to step over the side of the boat, and we'll see you on shore. If you make it all the way to shore, you get an A for the class. If you only make it part way and then drown, I'm sorry, but you get a failing grade. Okay, tongue in cheek, of course. But we will take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, and that's one of the exciting features of the trip. Okay, so for the grade for the class, you need to attend all lectures, and if something happens, some emergency, and you're not able to make it, we may be able to make up 1 or 2 lectures, but try as hard as you can to make it to every single lecture. I need you here, if at all possible. Take occasional quizzes. Starting next week, there should be a quiz at the beginning of each class session. This will take like 10 minutes probably. Do a very easy quiz, and I'll go over with you the review questions each week for the next week's quiz. And then keep a careful journal during the tour. All students that take it for credit, when we are in Israel, I want you to keep a journal of what you've seen, what you've experienced, what your impressions were of what you saw for each day. And then you'll turn that in, and that'll be part of your grade. And it doesn't need to be a lot. Some do more, some do less. But for each place that we visit, I want you to record something about that. And you'll have lots and lots of information. You won't be able to get it all down, but you'll be able to get down to significant things. And you'll want to make sure that you do take notes. And I would encourage you to do this, to take some notes during the day. And then in the evening, if you have, some of you may bring a computer with you, or maybe on a phone you can record it. I would at the end of the day before you go to bed, just kind of review what you've done. We won't have any official meetings in the evenings. I've talked to people who took tours to Israel. They toured all day, and then they had a class at night. And I just can't imagine that, because I'll tell you, by the end of the day, if you're like I am, you're exhausted. So we don't have that. At the end of the day, you're on your own. We'll have dinner together, and then you're on your own. Most of the people, I think, head up to their rooms pretty early, and because we'll be up early the next morning. But I would encourage you to kind of summarize your thoughts for the day before you go to bed at night, so that you've got those all together and they're well organized, and then you don't forget, because the next day it'll be on to other things, and you'll just start to forget. Okay. Okay, so for your grade, half of your grade will be determined by the quizzes we take each week here before we leave. The other half will be based on your journal. Okay. There's no particular format. I mean, I'm not picky about format on this journal. If you want to put it in Turabian format, which is our standard format for most of our papers for the college, that's fine, but I don't insist on that. Most importantly, I want it to be meaningful for you.
You
Yes.
want it typed up?
Yes, I do want it typed up. What you turn into me, I want typed up. When you're, I think only once I've had somebody turn in a handwritten journal. The handwriting wasn't very good. So I do want it typed up.
When is that?
The journal will be due, we'll be back about, halfway through the semester. So we've still got till the end of the semester, but I want you to get it into me within a couple of weeks of our return. Okay. So there'll be time for you to polish things up and get it all finished. And then if you get that in, then that'll be done. And this class will be over. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Okay. Booklet, we're going to get to that in a moment. There is, for those of you who are taking the class for credit and are in popular, I'll print this sheet off for the whole class, I think next week. Let me just open this. The official language of Israel is Hebrew. Hebrew was the language spoken by Israel in biblical times. Now, they did learn, Babylonian, Aramaic, during the Babylonian captivity, but they continued to hang on to Hebrew as their language. When Israel was dispersed in the 1st and 2nd centuries, first in AD 70 when the Romans destroyed the city of Rome, and then the final push came in the year 135 during what was called the Second Roman Rebellion under a leader named Bar Kokhba. We'll learn a little bit about him, and you'll see quite a bit about him when we're actually over there in Israel. And the Roman emperor evicted all the Jews from the land of Israel in 135. And this was really the push that resulted in the worldwide dispersion of Israel, a dispersion that was first prophesied by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy and becomes one of the major themes of the Old Testament prophets. The idea that Israel in the latter times would be dispersed throughout the nations of the earth, and that God would do a supernatural work and bring them back into the land promised to Abraham. This is a major, major focus of Old Testament prophecy. And when they began to come back in the 1800s, in the modern Zionist movement, there was a move that began among the Jews saying, we should bring back our old traditional language of Hebrew. It had not been spoken for like 1,500 years. But they continued to use it in the synagogues. They would read it, both the scriptures and the writings of the rabbis in Hebrew, but it wasn't a spoken language. So what happened was the revival of Hebrew as a spoken language. So just for fun, I've got some Hebrew phrases that if any of you are interested in learning a little bit of Hebrew, it's kind of fun, even just to be able to greet somebody in Israel with a Hebrew greeting. And they like that. They like that. So probably the most common thing to learn in Hebrew is how to say hello. And that is simply the Hebrew word shalom. Shalom actually means peace. And so it's a greeting. It means, may peace be to you when you say shalom to somebody. Shalom. And the Hebrew word for peace is a wonderful word. It's a very interesting word. In our language, peace usually signifies something like the cessation of hostilities. The two parties have been at war with each other, had a feud or whatever, and something happens to cause them to quit fighting. Now there's peace. The Hebrew word shalom actually comes from a root, shalom, which means to be whole, to be healthy. And it really puts more of a positive perspective on this idea of peace. When you wish somebody shalom, you're not simply asking that they don't have any fights. You're wishing them that they be whole, they be right in their standing with God, that they be in a very healthy frame of mind and spirit. So shalom. And it's a wonderful thing to wish people. Sometimes you'll hear added to that alechem, shalom alechem. That's actually addressed to more than one person. That means peace upon you plural. So shalom. The same word, shalom, means goodbye. Okay. So it's kind of like in Hawaii, they have aloha, right? It means hello or goodbye. So shalom, hello, goodbye. So you can say good morning, and this will be a frequent greeting here because we'll get started touring each morning pretty early. So you tell somebody good morning by telling them boker tov. Boker tov. Tov is the word for good. And in Hebrew, usually the adjective follows the noun. It does here. Boker tov. Boker tov. Boker obviously means morning. Boker tov, morning good. So you can say good afternoon and just be shalom again. Good evening, erev tov. Erev means evening. Again, tov is good. So erev tov is good evening. Good night is laila tov. Laila is the Hebrew word for night. So you've got boker tov, erev tov, laila tov. For good morning, good evening, good night. So I'll print this out for you next week, and we might look at a few of these each time. There's yes and no. Ken means yes. Lo means no. Ken, no. Please is bevakasha. Thank you is toda. Those are all very nice words to know. Okay. All right. Okay, now, for those that are going to be taking the quiz next week before class, this is some of the material that we're going to cover tonight. And I just want to go over these review questions, week one review. So we'll have the quiz at the beginning of class next Friday. So if you want to jot these down, you might want to do that. So number one, what is the name given to a Jew from Western Europe? And secondly, what is the name given to a Jew from the East? So again, we're thinking about those Jews that were evicted from the land of Israel. They were scattered throughout the world. Some went eastward, some went westward. And they go by different names. There are names for these different groups of Jews. They're not names of tribes. Okay, there are 12 tribes of Israel. We all know that. But these are names that were given to them later during what's called the diaspora. The word diaspora means the scattered seed. So the diaspora of Israel, the scattered seed of the children of Israel. So they are in the east and in the west. And then there are some Jews who are actually born in Israel, and they have a name. There's a name for Jews that are born in Israel. We'll cover that tonight, Lord willing. Okay, how many temples did Israel have in the Old Testament era? That's an important question. During what geological or archaeological era did the following people live? Okay, so we'll cover those geological and archaeological eras. Here are 5 people. Can you tell which era they belong to? Methuselah, Abraham, Moses, Samson, David. Okay, we know who these people are, and you might be able to put them in chronological order, but what is the name of the geological, archaeological era that they lived in?
Can we get this off the computer, Dr. Gunn?
Yeah. Yeah, if you're in the class, you're in Populi, it's on the page for lesson 1, lesson for week 1. And I could have printed this out, but I didn't. I might print it out for you during the break. We'll see. Okay, Israel forms a land bridge between what 3 continents? Land bridge between 3 continents. Next, name today's 5 political neighbors of Israel and tell the direction from Israel. Okay, so these are the countries surrounding Israel. What are they? There are 5 of them. Name the 4 seas of Israel. 4 seas. And then lastly, how big is the modern state of Israel in relation to the size of the state of California? Yeah, so those are the review questions. That's basically the quiz for next Friday. Any questions so far, besides what's the answer to, because that's coming. Okay, so the land of Israel is quite an interesting place. If you're like most people, you think of Israel and you think of a dry, arid desert. Most of the travel logs and movies about Israel have focused on the southern part of Israel that is desert. But there are many parts of Israel that are very lush and very green. One of the things that I'll mention a number of times is that Israel is almost like a miniature California. We have snow-capped mountains up here in the north and flowing rivers and lots of greenery. So does Israel. Israel has a snow-capped mountain, Mount Hermon, in its north, and it has very lush greenery and relatively a significant amount of water. Here in California, in the south, we have desert, and we've got a Salton Sea. Israel in the south has desert, and it's got the Dead Sea, which is 1,300 feet below sea level. It's the saltiest body of water on the face of the earth. In the central California, we have a lot of agriculture, lots of farms. We grow a lot of produce. And guess what? In the middle part of Israel, they have lots of farms, and they grow a lot of produce. We have a coastal mountain range, and then we've got the Sierra Nevadas. California is shaped like a bowl with a mountain on each side. Israel is like an inverted bowl. It has mountain ranges running up and down the middle, and then it drops down on the east and the west. So there just are a lot of kind of similarities that you can draw to California. So when we think about Israel, it's not all dry desert like most people are thinking of when they think of Israel. So here in this lesson, at the bottom here, there is a link to a YouTube video that is really quite good. And I want to show that now at the end of this first hour before we take a break. And it's just going to give you kind of an overview of the layout of the land, the different kinds of scenery and geography that you're going to see throughout the land of Israel. So let me go here. Now moving north along the coast of Israel from Tel Aviv, this is, well, Caesarea, the proper pronunciation is Caesarea, named after Kaiser or Caesar. And he had a tremendous palace out here. This is from the time of Herod the Great in the New Testament era. And then the buildings here were standing in the days of the Lord Jesus. Mediterranean Ocean out here. Different road, this is all good. All small Oh, here's Gamla. We won't go to Gamla, but Gamla is up in Galilee on the Golan Heights, and it's an important city, especially for Jews to visit. Gamla means camel. Gamal is Hebrew spelled Gamla, coming also drink. But things because it's built on a hill that has to be covered by Gamla. disciples were fishermen here. We'll go on a boat ride out on the Sea of Galilee. And just north, way up the very far north of Israel, right up by the border with Lebanon, is another section at Caesarea Philippi. Let's go down here and look at all the water. Yeah, down exactly. I'll say otherwise known as Beit Sheva, an amazing place. There's down in the fantastic property. And we'll walk through there. Out in the Shasta Valley, getting to the spring. Sometimes we get stuck there. I don't think I have and then down by the Dead Sea, En-Gedi. En-Gedi is a spring, a wonderful place, beautiful oasis. And then, of course, Jerusalem, the holy city itself, where the temple stood, where the Lord was crucified. There in Jerusalem, where the water source is Hezekiah's tunnel. And everybody who wants to will have a chance to go through the tunnel. I'm talking about the really long. Here's the western wall of the temple, called the Wailing Wall. It's not part of it, it's actually and held up in support of the temple that we have built ourselves. It was held in the site of the There are actually stones that were passed down by the wall. That was the stone. So, they're passed on the street, so that western wall. Here is the dome of the rock, right in the middle of Temple Mount. The foundation stone, the foundation of the world is here. Garden of Gethsemane, just across the Kidron Valley from the Temple Mount. The garden, too, one possible site for the burial of Jesus. There are two possible sites, and there may be some others. But this is, many people like this site as a potential site for the burial of Christ. Okay, and we have the lights. So we'll talk in more detail about all those places, but I just wanted to give you kind of a brief picture. I like this video because it shows the variety of different kinds of places. There are modern cities, there's springs and water and greenery, there's desert, there's old villages, you name it, and it's there. And it's a very, very fascinating and interesting place. So what I want to do at this time, I think, is take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and I want to get right into the first lecture for tonight, okay? That thing is fine, small, or light. have that. So welcome back. And we're going to be going through the material that's in the booklet. So I'd like to introduce this booklet to you. Again, for those that are taking the class, this is also a downloadable document in Populi, but I printed one out for everybody. If you just take a quick look at the table of contents here, we start out talking about the archaeological periods. I'll have a slide and we'll go over that later, but on page 4, you'll see the archaeological periods. Chalcolithic, coming from the Greek word chalkos, which means copper. That's the age of copper, and lithic from stone, copper and stone, Chalcolithic. 4000 BC to 3150 BC. Okay, so when we're talking about that old, that actually would cover before the flood. Okay, but this is some of the times they speak of. Then following that would be bronze, when it became possible to make an alloy from your copper and other metals to produce a stronger metal called bronze. And that was a real step forward for technology. So the Bronze Age is considered to be 3150 to 1200 BC. 1200, now we're talking about roughly the time of Abraham. Okay. So, excuse me, that's not right. 1200, much later than Abraham. So 1200, just before the time of David. David's about 1000. Okay. Now, the next period is called the Iron Age, from 1000 to 587. So from about the time of David on, we're in the Iron Age, which was a huge step forward for technology in the ancient world, because now you had something that was very, very strong, very powerful. So if you went up against an enemy who had a bronze sword, and you happen to have an iron sword, you could just dull his bronze sword really easily and you'd win. So not everybody actually entered the Iron Age at the same time. For instance, the Philistines had iron before the Israelites did. And so you find the Philistines entering the Iron Age a little bit before the Israelites did. There was, interestingly enough, an antediluvian Iron Age. You read the early chapters of the book of Genesis, and you find they were already making iron before the flood. So there was iron before the Iron Age. But we don't call it the Iron Age because it was time when that skill was lost to the flood. And when Noah and his sons started civilization over again, it took a while before people figured out how to make iron again. But the Iron Age. Then we have the biblical periods. Okay, so this is just another way of looking at the periods. The archaeological periods, those periods that archaeologists talk about. Biblically, we can think about it this way. Antediluvian, ante means before. Diluvian coming from the word deluge or flood. So antediluvian is before the flood, 4100 to 2458 BC. Post-diluvian, post meaning after. So the flood is our first kind of dividing line. Before the flood or after the flood. Antediluvian, post-diluvian. Bring us up to 2166. Now we're roughly at the time of Abraham. And so 2166 is going to be our beginning point for the patriarchal era. So the great patriarchs of Israel are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph is sometimes referred to as a patriarch. There's actually one Bible verse that refers to David as a patriarch. And the name patriarch came to be used in a looser sense of just important ancestors. But the actual patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob then, of course, has 12 sons that become 12 tribes of Israel. So the patriarchs, the ruling fathers. And that's the patriarchal period. We have the period of Egyptian sojourn, This is when Israel goes down into Egypt with Joseph, and they stay there for 400 years. So they're going down in 1876, they're coming back out in 1446 BC. 1446 is the conservative date for the Exodus. So many scholars will put the Exodus closer to 1200 BC, which is a late date. Remember, we're BC, so the numbers are going backwards. The smaller numbers are later times, and the bigger numbers are earlier times. But we know for certain from the Bible this date, 1446, was the date of the Exodus. It should be dated quite precisely and accurately, biblically. So that's the Egyptian sojourn. Then they come up at the Exodus, and they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. That's your 1446 to 1406. 40 years wandering in the wilderness, children of Israel. Then the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, 1406 to 1367. And after the generation of Joshua all dies out, Israel is ruled for a while by judges. And that, of course, is the book of Judges. Our time here, 1367 to 1050 BC. Then with the crowning of Saul, we have the monarchy. There are three monarchs of Israel: Saul, David, and Solomon. After Solomon, the nation splits, and you have a diarchy. You have a king of the north, a king of the south. But the monarchy, 1050 to 931, covering Saul, David, and Solomon. The diarchy, two kings, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. From 931, when Rehoboam takes the throne of Israel, and the northern kingdom under Jeroboam splits off, becomes the northern kingdom. Sometimes erroneously referred to as the 10 tribes. There were not 10 tribes in the north. I don't know why everybody always insists on that. The south, of course, was Judah and Benjamin. But can anybody in here tell me, any of you Bible scholars, tell me where the tribal allotment for Simeon was? Who knows? Anybody? It was in the south. It was actually right smack in the middle of Judah, down in the Negev desert, and they were never part of the north. And Simeon actually lost its tribal distinction. They're kind of swallowed up by Judah. So there actually were 9 tribes in the north, not 10. But you always hear it 10 in the north, 2 in the south. But this is the diarchy, and that's the important point to remember, the diarchy. Northern kingdom falls to Assyria then in 732 BC, leaving just the southern kingdom of Judah until it's carried away into Babylonian captivity, roughly 605 BC. 605 is when Babylon first starts coming against Israel, and then there are a number of deportations. So dating the actual Babylonian captivity is a little bit challenging, but the earliest date would be 605 BC. And then they are in Babylonian captivity until 538, when they return by a permission from Cyrus, the Persian king. And so from 538 on, it's called post-exilic, because it's after the exile, after the Babylonian captivity. So that's one way you can think of the biblical period. And I'll have a slide which puts these up here. During the period between the two testaments, from the close of the Old Testament and before the New Testament begins, sometimes it's referred to as the 400 silent years. Okay, a number of things take place. And many Christians are not really aware of what's going on during those 400 silent years, but we need to be, because it sets the stage for the New Testament. When you step out of the pages of the Old Testament, you leave the book of Malachi, and you step into the book of Matthew, it's like you're in a different world. Everything's changed. Rome is in power. You've got Pharisees, where'd they come from? Sadducees, who are they? All of a sudden, now there's not one high priest, there's a bunch of high priests. How'd that happen? All of these things came into existence during the intertestamental period, the 400 silent years. And look at these 4 stages. There's the Persian phase, the Hellenistic phase, This is Alexander the Great, if you remember him from your high school history class. That's what's going on here. Hellenistic means Greek. Then the Maccabean Hasmonean phase. You've no doubt heard about the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't read them. They're apocryphal books. They're found in the Roman Catholic Bible, but they're actually pretty good history about what's happening during this intertestamental period. And they are named after a group of Jewish rebels known as the Maccabees, who rose up in rebellion against the Greeks. So the Maccabean and Hasmonean period, taking you all the way up till 63 BC, and we're almost ready to step into the New Testament. Following the Maccabean and Hasmonean period, then we have the Herodian period. This is Herod the Great that we read about. And then, of course, his sons and grandsons carry on the Herodian tradition there. And that's another thing you find lots of in the New Testament, lots of Herods. And sometimes it's difficult to keep them all straight, because there are lots of different ones. But 63 until 4 BC would be the time frame that we're looking at Herod the Great. It's during this time that Jesus is born. Some believe he was born, oddly enough, in 4 BC. So you have Christ before Christ. But it's because of the dating of calendars in the intervening years, things don't match up quite right. But that's what we're looking at. Then you have periods after the New Testament on page 5. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think I wanted to just get right into this this next lecture, that I think will start putting some of these things in order. You have the review questions. There on the back side is a place for some of the geographical things we'll be talking about tonight. 12 geographic regions, and you can take notes on that if you'd like. And then 5 principal water courses is a place to talk about that on the bottom here. But let me start this up. When we think about Israel and where it's located, we're talking about the other side of the globe from where you and I live. Most of us as Americans are most familiar with the Western Hemisphere, North and South America. That's what we like to look at. It's what we've seen more of than anything else. This is the other side of the globe. And when we think about where Israel is located, we're talking about a place that is located in many respects at the center of the world. Why do I say that? Well, Israel is at the confluence of 3 great continents. If we take a little closer look, here's the Mediterranean, here's Africa down here, Europe, Asia, here's India over here, here's the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. Israel is sandwiched between Europe, Asia, and Africa. And right where these 3 continents meet, there's a tiny land bridge right in the center of the world, and that is Israel. Ancient cartographers used to refer to this as the center of the world. The Jews referred to it as the navel or the belly button of the world. Okay? So this is what we're looking at. Israel exists in this land bridge between 3 continents, and it's one of the reasons that Israel always has been, continues to be, and always will be such an important nation. It has importance geopolitically. Armies traversing from one continent to the other always pass through Israel. And over the centuries and millennia, battle upon battle upon battle has been fought on this piece of land where army has met army coming from opposite directions. And that is destined to be the case until Jesus comes. An ancient map that was produced in the 16th century, 1581, found in Hanover, Germany, shows this very picture. Here's Europe, Asia, Africa, and Jerusalem in the center. There's the Holy City. So this is how ancient cartographers used to view the land of Israel and the Holy City of Jerusalem at the center of the world. And it really still is that way. What sense does it make that the tiny nation of Israel, such a tiny, tiny nation, it garners such worldwide attention? The United Nations meets together to debate about Israel all the time, and it's a big deal. Why does this little tiny nation get so much attention? Well, it's within the program and plan of God, but it is geographically situated in a very, very important and strategic location. So let's take a little closer look. Again, here we're looking at the Mediterranean out here. Up here, this block of land is Asia Minor, not the continent of Asia, but the subcontinent of Asia Minor, modern-day country of Turkey. And we can think about where Israel lies geographically. To the east, we have the modern country of Iraq. Iraq has two big rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. That's why the land in between these two rivers was known as, who knows? Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia. In Greek, mesos means in the middle, and potamos means river. Mesopotamia, Mesopotamos, between the rivers. Okay. Potamos means a river. A hippopotamus is a river horse. Literally, hippos is horse, potamos, river. So between the rivers, we have Mesopotamia. Abraham came from Mesopotamia. Noah, when he landed up here north of Mesopotamia at Mount Ararat, and they came down off the mountain into this region, Mesopotamia. Out of the Garden of Eden flowed four rivers. Two of them were Tigris and Euphrates. Tigris and Euphrates. So where was Eden? Some people say, well, it must be down here where they meet. It's possible. However, bear in mind that the whole contour of the land was drastically altered by the flood. So are today's Tigris and Euphrates the same Tigris and Euphrates that flowed out of Eden? Good question, and nobody knows. But very possibly, Eden was there. It does say that God planted a garden eastward in Eden. Eastward from where? Well, if the point of reference is Jerusalem, directly eastward would be where Tigris and Euphrates meet. And that would make sense. So possibly that is where Eden was located. These two rivers make a fertile valley here. Most of this country around here is, in fact, arid, quite dry. But you have fertility here in Mesopotamia. You also have here, flowing right down through Israel, another kind of major river called the Jordan River. The Jordan River. So on the west side of the Jordan River, you have the country of Israel. On the east side of the Jordan River, you have the modern country of Jordan. If you connect this fertile area marked by the Tigris and Euphrates with this fertile area marked by the Jordan River, and further south into Egypt, the Nile, you end up with a crescent-shaped piece of land that people refer to as the Fertile Crescent. Because so much of this countryside is dry, arid desert. But here, where you find the rivers, you find fertility. And in Israel, people are always seeking after the water. Water is so important in Israel that it will unite enemies in peace. They will come together over water if they won't come together over anything else. But water is incredibly important. So this is your Fertile Crescent, and Israel's down here, the southern end of the Fertile Crescent. We can take another look at Israel, more of a political look at Israel, and thinking about where Israel lies in relation to its surrounding neighbors. And there are 5 countries actually surround Israel. Here again is the Mediterranean out here. In this yellow oval, we are looking at the country of Israel. So where are the neighbors of Israel? First of all, to the southwest is Egypt. Egypt and Israel share a border here in the Sinai Peninsula, or the Sinai Peninsula, as it is more appropriately called. You might remember that in 1967, during the 6 Days War, Israel conquered the Sinai Peninsula. and they added it to their country. And so for a number of years, they held on to this entire peninsula down here, down at the southern end of the triangular shape, and the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. But it is probably down here. But the first political neighbor we can talk about is Egypt. Today, Israel and Egypt have a peace agreement. And it's one of two surrounding countries that have a peace agreement with Israel. The other countries surrounding Israel are technically out of Israel and have been ever since 1948. But Egypt is at peace. To the south and east of Israel is Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia doesn't actually share a border, so to speak, with Israel, but down here, this whole shaded area is Saudi Arabia. Right over here on the west and north, you find this little point that comes up here. Down here, you see this body of water called the Red Sea. The Red Sea comes up and divides into these two fingers that surround the Sinai Peninsula. So these are gulfs. This is the Gulf of Suez, and then over here on the eastern side, the Gulf of Aqaba, if you live in Jordan, or the Gulf of Eilat, if you live in Israel. Because right up here at the north end is the Israeli city of Eilat and the Jordanian city of Aqaba. But notice this little point of land from Saudi Arabia also comes right up here to the tip of this gulf. And it's just a short distance across the water from this tip point of Saudi Arabia over to Israel. Okay, you can look across there on a clear day and see it. So we would have to say that Saudi Arabia is a neighbor of Israel's. Saudi Arabia today is in a state of war with Israel, but there are warming relations with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf nations to a remarkable degree. And there are implications in terms of what that means in terms of biblical prophecy that we might talk about later. So Egypt to the southwest, Saudi Arabia to the southeast. Next, we can talk about the country of Jordan. Jordan is the other neighboring country that is at peace with Israel. And the longest shared border that Israel has with any country is with Jordan. So they share this long border along the Jordan River. In the video we looked at earlier this evening, we saw the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea actually is drying up. It has been evaporating at an alarming rate, and people are very, very concerned about that. Years ago in the 1980s, an Israeli engineer came up with a brilliant idea to take water out of the Mediterranean and pump it up over the mountains of Judah and drop it down into the Dead Sea, generating hydroelectric power on the way in order to replenish the water that is evaporating out of the Dead Sea. It was called the Med-Dead project, from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea. Well, in Israel, things are not much different than they are here. The environmentalists got all upset. If you build this pipeline across the country, you're going to upset all the animals, and they won't be able to do their migration like they should, and we don't think that this is ecologically sound, and so put a stop to that. Well, now in recent years, the idea has been brought back, only now the idea is to bring water up from the Red Sea, from down here where Eilat and Aqaba are, and Jordan has agreed to cooperate with Israel in this project. Remember, Jordan and Israel are at peace, and this is now called the Red Dead project. And they've been talking about that and making plans, and they hope to start building this pipeline so that will bring water from the Red Sea up through Jordan. They'll desalinate it to use drinking water for both Jordan and Israel, and then take undesalinated water and put it down into the Dead Sea to replenish the water supply there. So an interesting thought. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Then moving further north, to the north and east, we have Syria. Syria is officially at a state of war with Israel. As you know, a very intense civil war has been fought in Syria for several years. And quite frankly, Israel had did not mind one bit that Syria was having a civil war, because that kept Syria from attacking Israel. Israel has undergone a number of conflicts with Syria over the years. Now that the civil war in Syria is beginning to die down, Israel is very concerned about what's going to happen on its northeastern border. When we're up on the Golan Heights, we'll be able to look across that border right into Syria, and we will see that. But Syria is a very ancient country. It existed in biblical times, called Syria at the time. This is where the Apostle Paul went to Damascus and was saved and commissioned to the gospel ministry. It was Damascus, Syria. And then straight to the north of Israel would be the fifth country, Lebanon. Lebanon. This is the same as ancient Phoenicia we read about in the scriptures, Phoenicia, but today it's called Lebanon. Lebanon was created at the same time as most of these countries in the Middle East, and that is in the days after World War I. The League of Nations came together and they started splitting up this country that had previously been part of the Ottoman Empire. And they entrusted most of these countries either to Britain or to France. So Israel was part of the British mandate. Syria and Lebanon were actually part of the French mandate. And until not too long ago, Lebanon was a beautiful country. The French had built it up into a wonderful resort area. It was thought of as like the French Riviera of the Middle East. And then they underwent something of a civil war as well, and the radical Muslims wanted to take control. There used to be a very, very strong Christian element in Lebanon. That Christian element is still there, but it's vastly weakened. It's now mostly ruled by various Muslim sects, and it's causing no end of problems. Poor Lebanon is not a place that I would want to visit. But it is right to Israel's north. Today, Israel is in the process of building, guess what, a wall between their country and Lebanon. They know that they need a wall for protection, and so they're building it. Whether we can build a wall on our southern border is a good question, but Israel can build one on their northern border. Lebanon has actually registered a complaint with the United Nations just in the last 24 hours about Israel building this wall. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. But you know what UN means? It means usually nothing, because they're great at talking about things and getting very little actually accomplished. Okay, so these are the political neighbors of Israel: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Any questions?
What did you say the state was of Lebanon with Israel?
They're at war. They're technically at war. They have been ever since 1948. The only two nations that have a peace agreement are Egypt and Jordan. Okay. All right. Okay, when we think about Israel, we can also think about the seas that are associated with Israel, and there are 4 of them. The first and most obvious one is the Mediterranean Sea. And look at this long coastline along the Mediterranean. There are a number of beautiful cities that you can visit here, and there are beautiful beaches. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the Mediterranean, but we will come down along this coastline, and we'll stop in Caesarea, and we'll stop in Tel Aviv, and get a chance to see that in Jaffa. We'll spend quite a bit of time actually touring in Caesarea and get a really nice chance to see the Mediterranean and visit it. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time there. And actually very little in the Bible takes place on this coastline. Israel was always a farming nation, never much of a seafaring nation. Now Solomon was an exception because he built up the navy of Israel. But it only seems to have been active during Solomon's days and kind of petered out again. Today, modern Israel is building up quite a navy. And they have these Dolphin-class submarines that were built by Germany. They are nuclear capable, nuclear missile capable. They have very fast patrol boats that guard this Mediterranean coastline. So they're building up a navy that's quite impressive. Say again?
Does this map show the Gaza Strip?
It doesn't show up, but right down here is Gaza.
Okay.
Gaza Strip is right, this part right in here. And the line map that you have shows a little portion right down here that's outlined, and that's the Gaza Strip. Okay. So the Gaza Strip also has this Mediterranean coast, which means that Gaza has a tremendous opportunity to become a beautiful, beautiful place. But they're too busy fighting Israel to develop their own infrastructure, and so it's a very sad state. Okay, Mediterranean is one of the 4 seas. The second is the Red Sea, which we already talked about. Remember, we talked about this Red Dead project. So the Red Sea is the eastern finger coming up from the Red Sea, gives you the Gulf of Eilat. Okay, this city right down here is Eilat in Israel, or on the Jordanian side, Aqaba. Why the Jordanians refer to this as the Gulf of Aqaba, Israelis refer to it as the Gulf of Eilat. But it's actually one of the 2 fingers sticking up from the Red Sea. It's forming one of the sides of that Sinai Peninsula. So the Red Sea is a sea that Israel has just a very tiny shoreline on, but one major city, Eilat. Israel has just opened a major airport right down here by Eilat, by the way, an international airport. And I'd like to fly in there sometime. I haven't yet. Never even visited Eilat. So, all right, moving a little further north then, we've mentioned the Dead Sea. This is where it's located. The Dead Sea, the lowest spot on the face of the earth, 1,300 feet below sea level. On this map, you'll see it has a northern portion and then a smaller southern portion with a narrow neck in between. See that? Remember I mentioned to you that the Dead Sea is drying up? It has dried up so much that this today actually forms 2 separate bodies of water. The Dead Sea is much deeper at the north than it is at the south. The south is almost completely evaporated. But the north is the bigger body of water. This is why they want to replenish it. There's no outlet to the Dead Sea. It's very hot down by the Dead Sea, so the water just evaporates and evaporates and evaporates. The major inlet for the Dead Sea is the Jordan River right here, which we'll talk about in a moment. But both the country of Israel and the country of Jordan draw a lot of water out of the Jordan for irrigation purposes. And so because they're drawing all this water out, not nearly as much water arrives at the Dead Sea as did in ancient times. And then with a high rate of evaporation, this is why the Dead Sea is drying up. But there's still a lot of water there, still a big body of water. And we're going to start our tour actually down here at the southern end of the Dead Sea. Then moving further north up here is the Sea of Galilee. And so all Christians know about the Sea of Galilee. Most of Jesus' public ministry actually took place up around the Sea of Galilee. So this is where the Sermon on the Mount takes place. This is where Jesus meets with his disciples after his resurrection. It's where Capernaum is, you read about many other places. We'll spend quite a bit of time up around and on the Sea of Galilee and the area around it. The Sea of Galilee is already below sea level. I think it's like 613 feet below sea level. And then the water exits the south end into the Jordan River and flows downhill all the way down to the Dead Sea.
Where does the Sea of Galilee get its water?
What's that?
Where does the Sea of Galilee get its water?
Okay. The Sea of Galilee gets its water mostly from underground springs.
Wow.
Yeah. There are some seasonal water courses that flow into the Sea of Galilee. But there's also, to the north of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River actually forms up here. And you have the upper Jordan, north of the Sea of Galilee, and then the southern Jordan, south of the Sea of Galilee. What you're looking at here is actually, and we'll talk about the Syrian African Rift. This is a valley down here, a deep gash in the surface of the earth called the Syrian African Rift. So what happens to water? It's influenced by gravity. It flows downhill, goes down, and it collects in these low regions. Both the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea are simply bulges in the Jordan River. Okay, so the Jordan River forms up here with snow melt from Mount Hermon. It comes up from springs and starts flowing together into creeks and forms a river. The upper Jordan River reminds me a lot of the upper Sacramento River, north of our Shasta Lake. And then you'd have a lake, and then the southern part of it. And southern Jordan is a lot like the Sacramento out here, roughly. But so that's what we're looking at here. The Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea are bulges in the Jordan River, the Syrian African Rift Valley.
Is the Sea of Galilee a fresh water?
Yes, Sea of Galilee is fresh water. It has a slight alkalinity to it, but it's fresh water that can be drunk. Until recently, Israel got most of its fresh water from the Sea of Galilee. Shortly after the country was formed in 1948 as a modern state, they built a vast piping system throughout the nation, taking water from the Sea of Galilee and piping it all through Israel for farming and for household use for fresh water. And it was a wonderful thing. The problem was the country kept growing and growing and growing, more and more people and more water demands, and at the same time they had several years of drought. And the level of the Sea of Galilee also has been dropping. So for the last couple of years, Israel has almost entirely quit drawing any water out of the Sea of Galilee. They're relying almost completely on desalinated water from the Mediterranean. So they have these big desalination plants along the coast where they pump water in, they pull the salt out, and they pipe that water throughout Israel. Israel is the world's leader in desalination technology. And they're exporting this technology to a number of places, including to California, because we've had our own problems with drought, and we're trying to wonder where we're going to get all the water from. And so we're actually learning from the Israelis how to do that. So these are the four seas: the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee. The Hebrew name for the Sea of Galilee is Kinneret. Kinneret. Okay, so we have a couple of students here who have taken some Hebrew. Anybody know what Kinneret means? It is a word that occurs in the Bible. Kinneret means a harp. A harp. If you look at the Sea of Galilee, its shape is a little bit like that of a harp, with an upright here, and then the bar across the bottom, the strings would be down in here. So it's called Kinneret, the harp. Yes.
Sorry, I have another question about the Dead Sea. Where does it become saltwater? Is it right there where the river?
Okay, so what happens, like I said, it's slightly alkaline here. As it flows south, all the way along, there's very little additional water coming in. And as it heats up in the sun, it gets saltier and saltier and saltier. So by the time it reaches the bottom down here, it's still technically fresh water, but it's getting a little bit salty. And then as it dumps into the Dead Sea, there's no outlet, it just sits there and evaporates. And so it's really in the Dead Sea where most of the saltiness takes place. It's through evaporation of the water. So it's a little bit salty right at the base, but most of it occurs in the basin itself. When you take a dip in the Dead Sea, it is so concentrated with minerals and salt that you float like a cork. And you maybe have seen pictures of people floating in the Dead Sea, maybe reading a newspaper or a magazine or something. And you can just lay on your back and float there. But when you get out, you must rinse yourself off with fresh water. So they have on the beaches there where you get out of the Dead Sea, they have these showers that you can rinse off with. And if you don't, you can actually get a burn on your skin, and a pretty serious burn. And you don't want to splash it in your eyes or get any in your mouth. You just have to be a little bit careful.
That's just because of the salt though?
Yeah.
We had heard, someone told us that it was getting greatly polluted.
Okay, so it's not so much the Dead Sea itself, but right down here at the southern end of the Jordan River, just before it empties into the Dead Sea, yeah, that's a big problem. Because different folks living up around here don't always have the best sanitary systems. And so you do have sewage flowing into the Jordan River. So this is interesting because the traditional site of the baptism of Jesus is down here at the southern end of the Jordan River. And it's on the Jordanian side. The Jordanians have built this up just in the last few years as a tourist site because people like to go there to get baptized. If you ask me, I would rather not get baptized there. We will have an opportunity for anybody that wants to be baptized. I know a lot of us are Baptists and believe you only get baptized once, but if you want to do it as an act of rededication and you want to try that, we will have a baptism. It's right up here at the north end of the Jordan, just where the water comes out of the Sea of Galilee, where it's nice and fresh and clear. And there's a wonderful baptismal site there. And so we've had a number of baptisms there. So that's something you can think about. It's a wonderful experience. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get closer to it. Okay, 4 C's of Israel. Okay, let's talk about the physical size of the country of Israel. The physical size of the country of Israel. So we're looking now at a map. The orange line here is the basic outline of it. Lebanon to the north, Jordan over here to the east, Mediterranean on the west. So one tip goes way down here to the Gulf of Eilat or Aqaba. This is desert down in this triangle, down in the very south. So you see Beersheba. That will be important for this slide. You sometimes hear in the Old Testament, you read about this expression from Dan to Beersheba. Maybe you say Beersheba. It's pronounced Beersheba, Beersheba. And up in the north, it's not printed on here, but way up here where this comes up close to Lebanon is a place called Dan. That's for the tribe of Dan, who had originally been given a tribal allotment down here by the Mediterranean coast. They couldn't kick out the Canaanites from there. So they traveled to the north, and they found a tiny tribe of Canaanites that was living at peace in this little place. And they said, well, we think we can whip them. And they did. And so Dan traveled from their tribal allotment up to the north, and that became the furthest north that you have in Israel in the Old Testament times. And so from Dan to Beersheba basically means from north to south. Even though there's more to the south of Israel, it's not really habitable. So what kind of distances are we talking about? Well, from the north to the extreme south is about 268 miles. 268 miles. That's less than half the distance from the north to the south of California. It's almost half, but it's a little bit less than half the distance from the Oregon border down to the Mexican border. So that's pretty small. And that's counting all of this uninhabitable area in the south, 268 miles. If we go from Dan to Beersheba, that's this, we're only talking about 160 miles. If you take off from Redding on I-5 going south and you go 160 miles, where do you end up? Huh?
Sacramento?
Yeah, maybe about Sacramento, maybe a little bit north of Sacramento. So when we're talking about the entirety of the country of Israel, we're talking about a very tiny country. Okay, this is half the size of California, and then even less than that, from north to south. So here's California on the left-hand side, Northern California. Here's, at the same scale, Israel. Okay, so we're talking about from the Oregon border, basically about down to Sacramento. Here's our 268 miles. sandwiched right in here, north to south. And then from Dan to Beersheba is about like going from Redding down to Sacramento. 160 miles. So that gives you a feel for the size of this country. Okay.
East to west.
East to west?
Wide.
Yeah, east to west. Well, it depends because you've got, notice that you've got the widest distances across here. Then it gets narrower, 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 narrower. It also gets narrower up towards the top. So it's almost like a diamond-shaped thing. But in terms of protection of the nation, they're very, very concerned about this. Talk about Israel having defensible borders. A fighter jet can fly across Israel in about 2 minutes. So, you know, it's very, very narrow. I don't have the figure in my head, but you can almost see from the scale and guess about what it is. Okay. Now there, despite its small size, as we saw in the video at the beginning of this class, Israel is very, very diverse. And there are actually 12 very definable geographic regions. Some of these are mountains, some are valleys, some are combinations of these two things. And you have on the back of the review question sheet this same map with these geographic regions marked out, and I'll identify these for you at this time. The first one we want to talk about, we've already mentioned, this is the Syrian-African Rift, or sometimes referred to as the Jordan Rift Valley. This is actually a gigantic gash in the surface of the earth. It's called the Syrian-African Rift because it begins up in the country of Syria and runs all the way down into Africa, where the Nile River runs. The Nile River is also part of the Syrian-African Rift. And it's a deep cut in the surface of the earth, and you can imagine this is where tectonic plates meet. And so for this reason, Israel is also a very earthquake-prone region. And there have been many, many very serious earthquakes in the history of the nation of Israel. Of course, there was one at the death of the Lord Jesus. The earth shook, the rocks were split open, the graves stood open. And then after his resurrection, Matthew tells us that others came out of their graves and appeared to many in Jerusalem. So that earthquake at that time caused those graves to split open. There's another great earthquake coming at the second coming of Christ that's actually going to split the Mount of Olives in two. But there have been many, many earthquakes, and we'll see evidence of that when we travel the land. There are places where there have been cities demolished. There are places where you can still see ancient stairways from the time of Christ that have a crack right down to the middle of it. There's a very notable one of these in Qumran, down by the Dead Sea. But this is the Syrian-African Rift, and it's one of the most notable features of the land. A very deep gash, and at the very bottom of it is the Dead Sea. Then, this is a very easy one to remember the name of. It's the coastal plain. It lies along the coast. It's a plain because it's fairly broad and flat. This is a place that's known for many, many farms. A lot of produce is grown there. It's very much like California. They grow a lot of citrus around in here, lettuce, bananas, pretty much you name it. It's a very, very rich farming area. Coastal plain. Just to the south of the coastal plain and rising up into this mountain. Remember I said that Israel is like an inverted bowl? It has mountains running down the middle, which you can see in this map here like this. Okay, then you've got a coastline. So this area that is rising up from the coast up into the mountains is called the Shfela lowlands. So these are kind of gently rolling hills that are beginning to climb up into the mountains. And the time of the year that we are going to be visiting them, it's very beautiful. It's very green. The grass is growing, like around here in this area of the Sacramento Valley. You know, everything's brown all summer long, and this time of the year things start to green up. And that's how Israel is. And there are lots and lots of wildflowers that are out at this time. Will be in another month. And it's a beautiful, beautiful time. But the Shephelah, the lowlands. Down here is where the Philistines lived, along the coast. So the Pentapolis, the 5 cities of the Philistines. Here you can see Ashkelon and Gaza, 2 of them. The rest of them, what today is the Gaza Strip, and then rising up into the Judean mountains. To the south of the Shephelah is the desert. This is the Negev Desert, Negev. Negev is the name of this region. It also becomes the Hebrew word for south, because it's in the south of Israel. That causes a little bit of confusion, because there's at least one place in the Bible that talks about Israel coming up from Egypt, and it says they went south when they were headed north. Because the translation says they were going south, but the Hebrew actually says they're going to the Negev. So these are some of the geographical things that influence our understanding of the Bible. But it's called the Negev Desert. And at the north end of the Negev Desert is this city of Beersheba that we talked about a moment ago, Dan to Beersheba. Beersheba is the furthest south you can go in Israel where you have really habitable land. The south is all desert. Nomads wander around in there sometimes, but it's pretty hard to settle there. Okay, so south of Beersheba, you don't really find habitations until you get down to Eilat on the Red Sea. Okay, let's move up now the middle of the country, and we have the mountains. This is the top of that inverted bowl. These mountain ridges that run up and down the middle of the country. So the southernmost mountains are the Judean mountains, because the tribe of Judah had its tribal allotment in the south. So we have the Judean mountains. And this is where Jerusalem is. Jerusalem is at the height of the Judean mountains. So look at where this lies in relation to the Dead Sea. Dead Sea at 1,300 feet below sea level. Outside of Jerusalem, Mount Scopus is the highest point in the Judean mountains, 3,500 feet above sea level. So in this short distance from the Dead Sea up to Jerusalem, it is very, very steep. So you can be thankful that you don't have to hike that. We'll ride a bus, and we'll get there quite easily, thank you. So, but there is a road that goes from Jericho up to Jerusalem. The parable of the Good Samaritan. What was it? There was a man going from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he fell among thieves. So he was on this very steep road going from 3,500 feet above sea level to 1,300 feet below sea level when he met those thieves, and he was left for dead. And then the Samaritan came along and rescued him, took him to the inn. Okay, so this is where that happened. Here are the Judean mountains. Jerusalem is there. You always read in the Bible about going up to Jerusalem. You never go down to Jerusalem. And that's geographically sound. It's at the top of the Judean mountains. From any direction around, if you go to Jerusalem, you have to go uphill. And so that then takes on spiritual significance because you ascend to the habitation of God. You always go up to the habitation of God. So let's go up to Mount Zion. Let's go up to the temple, the house of God. So these are the Judean mountains. So this area between the Judean mountains and the Dead Sea is called the wilderness of Judea. And you read about that in the scriptures. It's a very desolate area. As you can imagine, you've got that big elevation change here. So this is a place that is filled with sharp cliffs and great high mountainous areas. Now, you'll notice that just between the mountains of Judea and the wilderness of Judea, can you see it here, Bethlehem? This is where David was raised as a shepherd boy, keeping his father's flocks. And David spent a great deal of time in the wilderness of Judea as a young lad, chasing these goats and sheep around these rocky crags. And David oftentimes reflects in the Psalms, saying, "The Lord is my rock, my high place. a shelter for me. Because he knew about these cliffs. They were places that you could climb up on top of and be utterly protected from anybody. What do you have to do to protect yourself if you're up on the high cliff? All you got to do is chuck rocks down at your enemies. They try to come up and get you, you've got them covered. See? So the rock that David talks about, the Lord, our rock, he's the high cliff. He's the impenetrable fortress that no enemy can overtake. And we'll see those cliffs, and you'll see what we're talking about. One of the most notable of them is called Masada, which is down here at the southern end of the Judean wilderness, down by the Dead Sea. And we'll go up on Masada. You've heard of Masada, I'm sure, and that's a remarkable place. Okay, coming back to the mountain ranges, we have the Judean mountains in the south. Just north of that, the mountains of Samaria. In a sense, it's a long, kind of broken mountain range, but it falls into these distinct areas. So there's a little bit of a break between the Judean mountains and the mountains of Samaria. In biblical times, in the Old Testament, this was kind of the dividing line between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. Kingdom of Judah, and then the kingdom of Israel in the north. The kingdom of Israel had its capital where? Samaria. You can think about the mountains of Samaria as the region of the northern kingdom of Israel. This is also today politically in what's called the West Bank. And so there are not that many places that we are actually free to visit in this area. We can get into part of it, but a lot of it is it's not illegal. Well, it would be illegal for our tour guide, who's a Jewish Israeli, to visit a lot of these places in the West Bank. But there are lots of other places that we can go. Okay, now, while we're talking about mountains, there's another short, separate mountain range right here called Mount Carmel. Look at the coastline here. You notice as you go from north to south, you're coming down here, and then you get this bump that sticks out in the Mediterranean. See that? That's Mount Carmel actually jutting out into the Mediterranean. And it forms a little bay on the north of it, the only natural bay that Israel actually has, called the Bay of Haifa. The city of Haifa is located there. But what fascinates me is that Israel has its Carmel jutting out into the Mediterranean. California has a Carmel also. And it juts out into the Pacific and forms the Bay of Monterey. So there's so many parallels. They're so interesting. And so Mount Carmel is where Elijah has his great contest with the prophets of Baal. That happens here. We'll visit the site, the traditional site of that. There's a wonderful, wonderful vantage point from the rooftop of a monastery where you can look out and see north, south, and east. If it's a good clear day, you can see as far as you want to see. You can see almost all of Israel from there, from on top of Mount Carmel. So this is a separate mountain range from this central one. This one just kind of rises up here and juts out into the sea, and that's it. There's a very clear distinction between Mount Carmel and these mountains of Samaria, even though they kind of touch each other here. But there's a very definite dip. Then, as we move further north, there's a valley out in here we'll talk about, and then we have another part of this kind of broken mountain range running up down the middle called the Hills of Galilee. So running up and down the center, you've got the Judean mountains, mountains of Samaria, and then furthest north, the hills of Galilee. And we have this little mountain range here, Carmel sticking out there. We can even go a little bit further north and continue this main broken mountain range and move up into Lebanon. Now we're actually leaving Israel, going up into Lebanon. It's part of the same broken mountain range called the Mountains of Lebanon. The name Lebanon comes from a Middle Eastern word, Lavan, Lavana, and in Hebrew, Lavan means white. And Lebanon is the white country. because it's significantly further north than Israel, and they get a lot more snow. This is known as the White Region. Not much snow in Israel, although they just did have a snowstorm in Israel just last week. In fact, it was a quite welcome snowstorm because Israel has faced 6 years of drought in a row. It's because of a lot of problems. They're very, very grateful for the rain that they're getting this year. And I am praying on a daily basis that Israel gets lots and lots of rain this winter. We hope it's all done by the time we go there. I'm not selfish or anything. Okay. But the mountains of Lebanon. Then one more mountain we can talk about right over here, Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is shared by 3 countries. Part of it is in Israel, part of it is in Lebanon, and part of it is in Syria. And all 3 countries have important military observation posts on Mount Hermon. Israel also has a skiing facility. And so when they get enough snow, people go up there and ski. And it's supposed to be open this coming week because of the 3 feet of snow they just got last week. So Mount Hermon. Somebody asked about where does the Sea of Galilee get its water? And the answer to that was it comes from the upper Jordan River. The upper Jordan River gets most of its water from Mount Hermon. So what happens is the snow melt from Mount Hermon seeps down into the earth, and the karstic pressure from the limestone causes this water to bubble up in springs, hundreds of springs all around the base of Mount Hermon. And they begin to come together into rivulets and forming streams, and they flow together down to the Syrian-African Rift. So again, what's happening, water is flowing, following the force of gravity down into this deep gash in the earth, and it forms the Jordan River. So Jordan, Yarad, Jordan, Jordan. There's no J sound in Hebrew, okay? So Jordan, Yarad means to go down. The Hebrew word means to go down. And Dan, remember we talked about Dan. Dan was the furthest north in Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. What is the Jordan River? It's the going down from Dan. Dan is right up here in the north where the Jordan River forms. So they have the Yarad, Jordan, going down from Dan. That's the Jordan River. And it all starts up here on Mount Hermon, where you get this snow falling, melting, seeping into the ground, producing these springs that come up and form these rivulets, streams. You've got the Jordan River. So these are the major mountains: Judean mountains, mountains of Samaria, hills of Galilee, and the mountains of Lebanon, all kind of one broken chain. And then in addition to that, you have Mount Carmel over here, Mount Hermon over here. Mount Carmel, again, is actually a short mountain range. It's not one mountain with one peak. It kind of goes along with various peaks. It's a low-lying mountain. Okay, so those are the mountains. We've got these low-lying areas here that we talked about. Now, notice in between Mount Carmel, mountains of Samaria, and the hills of Galilee, we've got a region in here we haven't talked about yet. This is the Valley of Jezreel. The Valley of Jezreel. And in ancient times, it was swampy. And a lot of mosquitoes bred there. And they caused a lot of problems with malaria. But it has been largely reclaimed and made into farming country now, and it's very, very productive and fruitful today. Another region that was known for swamps and malaria was up in here, this northern upper Jordan area. If you look on many of your maps that you have in your Bible maps, north of the Sea of Galilee, you'll find a lake that's known as Lake Hula. Lake Hula. It really is not a lake at all. It looks like a lake on your maps. I had one lady insist to me there's another lake in Israel called Lake Hula. I know it because it's right here in my Bible. I see it. and she was a Sunday school teacher. She taught over that. But what she didn't know is that it wasn't a lake; it was a swamp. And in the early days of Israel, when the Jews were returning to the land trying to rebuild this, a lot of them got sick from malaria. So they undertook a huge project to drain the swamps. And they did two things. One thing was they built fish ponds. So they drained the water into these areas, and they started raising fish, farming fish. The other thing that they did was they brought in a tree that is not native to Israel, but it's the eucalyptus tree. Because the eucalyptus trees are very, very thirsty trees. They planted eucalyptus all over the place in that valley, and it dried up the water. So between the fish ponds and the eucalyptus, they were able to get rid of the malaria swamps, and they were able to build fish ponds. And there's no Lake Hula today. There never was a lake, but now there's not even a swamp. But there's some beautiful, beautiful, very rich farmland. But the Valley of Jezreel, there's much that happened here. On the west side of the Valley of Jezreel, you'll see Megiddo. Okay, Megiddo. The Hebrew word for mountain is Har, H-A-R, Har. So the mountain of Megiddo is Har Megiddo, or Armageddon. So when the Bible talks about Armageddon, that's the mountain of Megiddo, which is right here. The valley of Armageddon is the Jezreel Valley. So this is where that great end time battle commences between the forces of the Antichrist and the returning Lord Jesus Christ. So we will visit Megiddo, and we'll be able to look out over this valley. We will also, on the other side of the Valley of Jezreel, visit Nazareth. And from the brow of Nazareth, a cliff overlooking the Jezreel Valley, have a wonderful view of this whole area. There are a number of important things that took place. The prophet Elisha was active in this Valley of Jezreel primarily. There are a number of events that occur in the book of Judges that happened in the Jezreel Valley. So we'll visit that area. We'll talk about those things when we get there. Okay, so these are the 12 important geographical regions, each one really very distinct from the next one. Any questions so far? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break to really make it. And so that's worked out pretty good, but we did take a couple of breaks during the first and second intifadas. One time I had to cancel. That was time before last, and we just did not have enough people.
Well, several people got sick right at the last.
Yeah, we had several people that got sick right at the last, and that was when Israel was involved in this big war down with Gaza, and a lot of people getting scared, you know, and we just couldn't make it fly. That's the only time I've ever had to cancel. I just, I hated to do that. So, okay, we're going to jump right back in and get started again. So we talked about the 12 geographic regions of Israel. I want to mention the principal water courses of Israel. And these are like major rivers. Now, there are lots of tiny rivers. What we would call creeks or maybe intermittent rivers. The Hebrew word for this is a wadi. It's actually an Arabic word, wadi, W-A-D-I. And it's a river bed that fills up with water during the rains, and that's dry the rest of the year. There are lots of those. But these, for the most part, are rivers that flow year-round. And there are, 5 of them that we should mention. The Yarmouk, the Kishon, the Jordan, which we've already talked about, the Jabbok or the Yavok, and the Arnon. So let me locate them for you. You already know where the Jordan is, running right up here down the middle. This map shows you that Lake Hula, that swamp, doesn't it? Right up here, north of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so The Yarmouk actually flows from Jordan, from the country of Jordan, down into the Jordan River, the Yarmouk. And it joins the Jordan just south of the Sea of Galilee. See it there? The Yarmouk River, Yarmouk. And it flows with water year-round. The second, the Kishon River, is just it's actually a pretty small one, but it runs here. Okay, what is this that juts out into the Mediterranean here? What is it? Mount Carmel, okay, making this Haifa Bay. Just on the north side of Mount Carmel, you have a river, the Kishon River. And it is quite interesting when Deborah and Barak take on the armies of Sisera. They talk about the mighty waters of the Kishon. Well, the Kishon, if you look at it, is about like Churn Creek down the road here. About all there is to it. But when you get lots and lots and lots of rain, it can swell up and have quite a bit of water in it. But the Kishon River, and it flows into the Mediterranean. Okay, Yarmouk, Kishon. The Jordan, of course, we've talked about. There's the upper Jordan, north of the Sea of Galilee, forming from snowmelt off of Mount Hermon. Then below the Sea of Galilee, which is just a bulge in the river, you have the lower Jordan, and then it ends here at the Dead Sea. The Jabbok River, or Yavok, pronouncing it Hebrew-like. Arabic will have a J sound, but not Hebrew. So Jabbok or Yavok River empties into the Jordan about halfway between Galilee and the Dead Sea. Okay, so it's originating again in the country of Jordan, flowing down in here. What the children or let me say this, that when people would travel north and south over here on the east side of the Jordan River, the Jabbok River is a deep canyon you've got to cross. Okay, so that causes problems. You'd be better off maybe coming down here into the Jordan Valley and going along where it's flatter. But there are its own problems there. But the Jabbok River. And then we have the Arnon River. The Arnon River is further south, also originating in the country of Jordan, and it empties into the Dead Sea. It's another source of water for the Dead Sea besides the Jordan. The water will just go in there, and there's no outlet. So these are some of the major water courses of Israel. You can see some of these others that have a W in front of them. The W stands for Wadi. The R would stand for a river, but these are actually all wadis here. They don't have water in them all year round. Here's Wadi El Kelt, Wadi El Sant. We'll see the Wadi Kelt on our tour. It's a very deep canyon. It's a very interesting one. Just off the main road going from Jericho up to Jerusalem, Wadi Kelt. But it's not a main water course by any means. Okay, let's talk a little bit about weather in the Holy Land. Malcolm Cartier, this is our tour guide. And hopefully we'll be seeing him. He was supposed to be our tour guide last time. His wife had emergency surgery, and he couldn't be with us. And the tour company gathered around what they could, and we ended up having 3 different tour guides. They were all very good, but almost every time I've gone, I've used Malcolm. And he has explained in this little diagram and the accompanying slide how the weather works in Israel. So if you take a line up and down the center of Israel from north to south, like this, dividing it in half, take another line running horizontally across the center from west to east. Actually, where these 2 lines meet, that's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is smack in the middle of the country of Israel. And it also divides Israel into these 4 quadrants. So, here you see out in the Mediterranean, northwest rain flowing down here into Israel. So let's take a look at what he has written here. Owing to hot air rising in the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf is south and east, so down here in this corner. Hot air rising in the Persian Gulf region southeast of Israel. A vacuum is created that must be filled. This affects the Holy Land by sucking in rain clouds from Europe located to the northwest. Okay. So hot, dry down here, creating a vacuum, drawing in moisture from the northwest down this way. This is the way the storms come into Israel, which drops rain primarily over the north and west of Israel. This region here that he's labeled as wet and wet, with a narrow line of rain to the east of the Rift Valley. So the further east you get, the more the storms dry out. So this is wet, dry. So the wettest part is here in the west, where the storms first hit. They begin to rain. They start to run out of water. It becomes less wet the further east you go on the east side of these mountains. With a narrow line of rain to the east of the Rift Valley in the Transjordan Plateau, where the clouds regroup before finally breaking into the arid Great Arabian Desert. You move further east here into the Arabian Desert. Although this diagram is not absolute, and there are local conditions, the land can almost clinically be divided into 4 main rain regions by 2 lines drawn from north-northeast to south-southwest along the backbone. That's this north to south one of the mountains parallel to the coastline and laying east to west where the vertical and horizontal lines intersect with Jerusalem. So the very driest part is down here by the Dead Sea. Dry, dry. Okay, it's further east and it's further south. Further west you go, you get wetter. So here is dry, wet, and over here is wet, dry. And the very wettest part in the northwest. And that's pretty much how it works. So we will start out by the Sea of Galilee, by the Dead Sea. So we'll see the very dry, desert-like conditions down there. From there, we'll move north to the Sea of Galilee. We'll spend some time around here, where it's going to be a little bit wetter. Now, we'll be arriving right at the tail end of the rainy season. So it's possible we may not see any rain at all. It's also possible we may see a rain shower or 2. So you just have to be like a Boy Scout and be prepared. Okay. And then, of course, we'll come down the coastline here, because here is where Megiddo is, base of Mount Carmel, Caesarea, and down to Tel Aviv, into the drier part, and we'll move up to Jerusalem. So we'll be experiencing all 4 of these areas of Israel. Okay. In the summer, the horizontal line moves north, and in the winter, south. So this horizontal line. Okay. So the summertime moves north, so you have more dry. So what happens to Jerusalem? In the summertime, it gets really hot. In the wintertime, this line moves south. What happens to Jerusalem? In the wintertime, it gets really cold. What's that sound like? Sounds like Reading. And so there are a lot of similarities, except that Reading is down in the valley, and Jerusalem is up in the mountains, so it's maybe more like Bernie, okay? But at any rate, this is kind of what's going on here. This gives greater winter rain to Jerusalem and hot, dry summers. The result of this basic rain pattern means that the west is arable land for farming, where the crops invite bees that give honey, and the east tends to be arid, where the Bedouin roams with sheep and goats giving milk, therefore making it a land of milk and honey. That's the expression that the Bible uses to describe it. Deuteronomy 8, verses 7 through 10 sees this as a good land with great opportunity for abundant crops. But Isaiah 7, verses 18 to 22 sees a land of milk and honey that is overrun by the fly from Egypt and the bee from Assyria. And so from these dry, arid countries, you get the fly and the bee coming in. All of these agricultural terms are directly tied to the geography of the land, and we read about them frequently in the Bible. Okay, during November, early rains, February, the latter rains. So we're arriving right at the end of February. Almost 75% of the annual rain falls during these months, November and February. And here's your average temperatures, Celsius and Fahrenheit in the various months for Tel Aviv, down by the ocean, and Jerusalem up on the top of the mountain. So we're going to be there in February. So what can we expect? Well, average temperature in Jerusalem for February is 52, moving up into 56 degrees in March. Now, that's average temperature, so that's averaging between daytime and nighttime. Okay, so it's going to get warmer than that during the day, a little cooler than that at night. What's that sound like? It sounds just about like here, doesn't it? Okay. The climate in Israel is very much like California. And Jerusalem, pretty much like here at the north end of the Sacramento Valley. Okay, we touched on these already. It's in your book. We mentioned them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But the biblical eras, antediluvian, again, this is before the flood, beginning at creation up until 2300 BC. Post-diluvian, from 2300 to 2150. Okay, so we're putting the flood of Noah at about 2300 BC. Patriarchal period, from 2150 to 1875. This would be beginning with the time of Abraham, extending up until the time of Joseph. The Exodus, date of the Exodus, 1446. That is the first Passover. And they wander for 40 years, so bring us up to 1406, which would be the date of the entry of Israel into Canaan. Then the conquest of Canaan under Joshua and the men who were with him, 1406 to 1390. The period of the Judges, 1367 to 1050. 1050, then about 50 years before David. So you've got this intervening period of time for the first king, which is Saul. So the monarchy beginning in 1050. The reign of King Saul. Then we have David. Then we have Solomon. Death of Solomon, about 931. The accession of Rehoboam to Solomon's throne. And the nation gets divided as Jeroboam leads 10 tribes, so-called, or 9 tribes in the north, in rebellion of secession. It is the diarchy, 931 to 586. The Babylonian captivity, 70 years, 586 to 520. The post-exilic era, returning from Babylonian captivity, 520 till 400. Now, we're talking about biblical eras. So around 400, we have the close of the Old Testament. New Testament era, 5 BC to AD 100. So there is a gap of 400 years that we're not covering here because we're talking about biblical eras. Those are the 400 silent years. Doesn't mean that history stopped. A lot of history, rich history, interesting history that you should be aware of in between the post-exilic era and the New Testament era. But we're just talking about the biblical eras here. Now, during the reign of Solomon, Solomon builds the first temple. One of the review questions for next week's quiz is how many temples were there during the Old Testament? The Temple of Solomon stands until the Babylonian captivity, and it was destroyed by the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. That is referred to as the First Temple era. Okay, from the end of the monarchy until the Babylonian captivity, First Temple era. When the Jews returned from Babylonian captivity, they did not have a temple to worship God in. One of their first and primary concerns was rebuilding the temple. That was Ezra's big project, the book of Ezra. Nehemiah's big project was to build the city, but Ezra's was to build the temple. And this was the second temple, and from the post-exilic era, the return from Babylonian captivity, up until the completion of the New Testament, you have the second temple. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year AD 70. Now here's a weird quirk of history. Both the first temple and the second temple were destroyed on the same day of the year, the 9th day of the month of the Hebrew month Av. And to this day, the Jews acknowledge the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av is the name of it, to commemorate the destruction of those two temples. And throughout the history of the Jewish people, there have been many, many, many tragedies that have occurred on the same day, such as the expulsion of the Jews from England and the Spanish Inquisition, the final solution in Hitler's Holocaust started on the 9th of Av. And it's a weird quirk of history, or whether it's a quirk of history or something under the sovereign arrangement of God, the 9th of Av. Both temples were destroyed on the same day of the year. But there were two temples in the Old Testament times, the first temple and the second temple. And they talk about the first temple era and the second temple era. They correspond to these biblical periods of time. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so the geologists and the archaeologists also have their ways of talking about these biblical periods of time. Now, what you're looking at here on this slide is meant to depict what's called a tell. So, just a little bit of an explanation. In ancient times, people lived where you had access to water and you had a place that you could defend. Those are the two main things. You had to have water, and you had to have defense. And that pretty much limits the number of places where you're likely to have civilization. So if you had a place, a settlement, say, and an enemy did manage to overtake you and destroy you and burn your houses, then everything collapses. But it's still a place that has water nearby, and there's something attractive about it that makes it defensible, so someone else is liable to come along and build on those ruins. So what happens in time is these places get built up higher and higher. As people come in, they didn't have, big D8 cats to sweep away all this old stuff. They just built on top of the old ruins. And so they get built up layer upon layer upon layer like a stack of pancakes. And so you find these places that have these mounds. They look like hills, but they're man-made. They've developed over time. And the word for that is a tell, T-E-L. A tell is a mound where settlements have been. And you can now, as an archaeologist, dig down through these settlements. The deeper you go, the further back in time you're going. And so geologists and archaeologists talk about these different strata, these layers of these tells, and they can date the civilization based on how far down they've gone. So we're looking at a tell here with the side dug out at various levels. And this is showing different layers at different times. So at the very top, we have the Roman and Islamic period, 63 BC to AD 700. Okay, 700 is about when Islam moves into the Holy Land and starts pushing out the Jews and the Christians. So 63 BC is the beginning of the rule of the Romans over this region. So this would be a very recent period of time, corresponding to the New Testament. It's part of that. Okay. Down below that, you have the Hellenistic era. Hellenistic means Greek. Okay. Hellen is the Greek word for Greek. So if you know anybody named Helen, Okay, the common name, it comes from the Greek word for Greek. And the Greeks were in power before the Romans were. Starts with Alexander the Great. And the years for the Hellenistic era are 330 BC to 63 BC. Okay. Now, biblically speaking, look over on the right-hand side, this corresponds to the period of the Maccabees. The Maccabees. It's intertestamental. It's between the close of the Old Testament, beginning of the New Testament. So the Hellenistic period is in that intertestamental period. And it's also the time when the Maccabees are ruling in Israel. Go back a little bit earlier than that, we have the Babylonian and Persian period. So the Babylonians, okay, we think about the Babylonian captivity, Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is overthrown by the Medes and Persians, and the Persians become the next ruler. So this is just history. But 587 to 330 BC, we have the Babylonians and the Persians in control. And over here, this corresponds to the exile and the post-exilic biblical periods. The exilic and post-exilic. Okay, let's dig down a little further in our tell. And earlier than the Babylonian, we have Iron Age 3. Now notice, there's an Iron Age 3, Iron Age 2, Iron Age 2B, 2A, and then depending on who you are talking to, there may be an Iron Age 1 also. But there are different phases of the Iron Age. So Iron Age 3, or 3B, 720 to 587 BC, which is going to correspond to the divided monarchy to the fall of Samaria, and taking in part of this period of Judah, which is contemporaneous with the divided monarchy. Then going down before that, we have Iron Age 2, 2B through 3A, giving us 900 to 700 BC, corresponding to the United Monarchy. When we talk about the reign of David, for example, the most significant part of this period of time, David is ruling during Iron Age 2. Iron Age 2. Then Iron Age 2A, earlier part of our Iron Age 2 is 1,900. This is also Davidic, by the way, but this corresponds here to Light Judges, Samuel, and Saul. Okay, there's some overlap here, but you'll find these terms used. Iron Age 2A is 1,900. Then you've got bronze. The bronze is before iron, and notice it's divided into early, middle, and late bronze. Okay, the late bronze is the most recent, 1550 to 1200 BC, corresponding to Israel being in Egypt, the time of the Exodus, conquest of Canaan, and the period of Judges. That would all be late bronze. Then we have middle bronze, 2200 to 1500 BC, corresponding to the time of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're late bronze. Early bronze, way down at the bottom of the tell now. This is a very, very early civilization, early bronze, 3150 to 2200 BC. So we're looking at the early Canaanite period. Okay. This is before the patriarchs really move in, before the call of Abraham. Right up until the call of Abraham, Canaanites are living in the land of Israel at this time. And some of the earliest settlements we have are from the early bronze. There are a few excavations that have found civilization in the Chalcolithic era, okay, the Copper Age, Copper Stone Age, Chalcolithic, 4030-150. But there are very few of these. Okay, they're calling this prehistory. But we might say it's in the early days after the flood, maybe even pre-flood, if some of these were buried and preserved and they have been discovered, would be Chalcolithic. Then, of course, if you dig down, we're at the bottom of the tell, now we're getting down into virgin soil. But all of this up here in this tell, this is all man-made civilizations. here's a little closer look at that same thing. I just cut that slide in half. Put these archaeological periods over here, approximate biblical periods over here, just to make it a little bit easier to see. All right, now, those are the time periods. Now, when we talk about the Jewish people, one of the big questions that people face is, who are the Jews? Who are the Jews? Most obviously, the Jews are the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had more than one son, but the promise was passed on through Isaac, not through Ishmael. Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. The promise is passed on through Jacob, not Esau. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these three men are referred to as the patriarchs of Israel. But Israel, the Jewish people, are really descended from Jacob. Jacob is renamed Israel. His 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. Originally, the word Jew referred to just one of those 12 tribes, the tribe of Judah. Since Judah became the prominent tribe of the southern kingdom, Judah gave its name to the entire southern kingdom, Judah, which encompassed the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, and the tribe of Simeon. When the Jews returned from Babylonian captivity, they kept that name, Judah, or Judea, or Jew, and applied it to everybody that came back into the land. So post-Babylonian captivity, the term Jew comes to mean anybody from any of the 12 tribes. And it's been used that way pretty consistently ever since the return from Babylonian captivity. Now you've got, some people have ideas about the northern tribes being lost and never coming back. Now we've just been through Christmas. At the birth of Jesus, he is then taken as a baby and presented in the temple. And in the temple, they meet two prophets, a prophet and a prophetess. Anna, a prophetess, is from what tribe? Anybody know? She's from the tribe of Asher. Well, wait a minute, I thought the 10 tribes were lost. What's somebody from the tribe of Asher doing in Jerusalem? The fact of the matter is that when the Jews returned from Babylonian captivity, there were some from Israel who had remained in the land the entire time, and there were others who began to filter back in because they hadn't gone too far off in the Assyrian captivity. And all 12 tribes were present. But they're all taking on the name Jew now. Now, after the Jews then are dispersed, first in AD 70, and then again in AD 135, in the Second Jewish Rebellion, what happens? They go into the countries of the world, in the diaspora, and they form different groups. Jews that went off to the east took on certain customs. Jews further to the west took on different customs. They actually had different ways of pronouncing the Hebrew language, and they observed slightly different ways of observing the festivals of Israel and various things. So, what happens during this time of diaspora is the term Ashkenazi is used, originally given the Jews from a region in Germany, Ashkenaz. Today, the term is loosely used to describe most Jews of European, that is, Western origin. Ashkenazi Jews. They talk about Ashkenazi Hebrew pronunciation. So, Western European. A second group of Jews is known as Sephardi Jews. Sephardi. Originally a name given to Jews from Spain and Portugal, which we would think is Western Europe. But what happened was these Jews then were thrust out of Spain in the Middle Ages, and most of them ended up going west, and the name Sephardi stuck, or Sephardic Jews. So originally given Jews from Spain and Portugal, the term today is loosely used to describe most Jews of Asian and African, that is, Eastern origin. You get two kind of big groups: Western Jews, Ashkenazi; Eastern Jews, Sephardi. But a Jew who is born in the land of Israel is neither Eastern nor Western. He's a native-born son, and he's referred to as a Sabra. Sabra is a native-born Jew, born in Israel, from the Hebrew word tzavar, which refers to a cactus. And we'll see that tzavar, the Sabra cactus in Israel, called a prickly pear cactus, has needle-like thorns, like lots of cacti do, soft, sweet, edible fruit inside. And so they say that this name is very suitable to the native-born Israel because he's prickly on the outside and sweet on the inside. So the Jewish people love to debate and argue. They can't talk without, going like this all the time. Okay, and you'll think that you've done some horrible thing, and you've got somebody right up in your face, swinging their arms, and you maybe have this angry expression on their face, and 5 minutes later they're sitting down sipping a cup of tea or coffee with you, telling jokes and having a great time. Very much like the native-born Sabra Jew. Okay, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Sabra. Okay, we're almost done, but I want to cover this 400 silent years, just briefly. Okay, we have a Persian period, a Hellenistic period, a Maccabean period, and a Herodian period. Between the Testaments, like I said, lots and lots of history is going on. So what happens? The Babylonians take Israel into captivity. Who lets them return? The Persians. This is Cyrus. Cyrus was so important to God's program for Israel that the prophet Jeremiah refers to Cyrus, well, actually God reports through Isaiah that Cyrus is my Messiah. He uses the word Messiah or anointed one to refer to this Gentile king. That's how important Cyrus was. When President Trump moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, this was such a momentous thing for the nation of Israel that the Jewish people are now referring to President Trump as a second King Cyrus. Second King Cyrus. Yeah. So there's a great deal of love for President Trump, if not in America, at least in Israel. Okay. But the Persians. Okay, so this was the first part of the intertestamental period. The Persians are in control. When Israel comes back and rebuilds, they're doing so only by permission of this Gentile king. They had a building permit, basically. The authority, political authority, was a foreign power. Okay, and this all comes into what the Bible refers to as the times of the Gentiles. Times of the Gentiles begin with the Babylonian captivity, a succession of four great Gentile world powers: Rome, Medo-Persia, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. That succession of four world powers outlines the times of the Gentiles. The fourth one, Rome, brings us up into the present time. It has never ceased to exist. And out of that fourth Roman Gentile power will arise the Antichrist, whom Jesus Christ will crush at his second coming to establish his kingdom. Okay, let's come back here to Persian. The Persian period is followed by the Greek period. Okay, so Medo-Persia, then Greece. This was brought in by Alexander the Great. And so the Greeks were in power during much of the intertestamental period. But they come in after the close of the Old Testament, so most of us as Christians have never read about the Greeks. And their rule stopped before the New Testament begins, so most of us as Christians have never read about the Greeks. But if you happen to be a Roman Catholic and had a Catholic Bible and read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, you'd read a lot about them because that's where this history is covered. Now, I'm not saying the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees are inspired scripture. They're not. But they do have a lot of helpful history. And through 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and then along with those, the writings of Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian, we have a lot of this history between the Testaments. Hellenistic period, 332 to 167. Then Maccabean, Hasmonean, this was a brief period of Jewish rule in the Holy Land by the Maccabees. They rose up, they threw off the oppression of the Greeks, and they actually placed kings on the throne. But those kings were not from the tribe of Judah, like God said they should be. They were actually from the tribe of Levi. They were priest kings, and they were known as the Hasmoneans. The Hasmonean rule was brought to an end by an Idumean named Herod. And so we have the Herodian era, 63 through 4. So Idumean, he was Edomite. He was an Edomite. But he desperately wanted to be Jewish. And he married a Jewish girl by the name of Miriamne, but the Jews never accepted him. But he wormed his way into political power. He got Caesar to appoint him as king of the Jews. And when he heard there was one born in Bethlehem, king of the Jews, wise men came and said, where is he who was born king of the Jews? Herod said, no. I'm the king of the Jews. This one, I'm going to get him. And that's why he sent his soldiers to Bethlehem to kill all the babies 2 years old and under, because he only was going to be king of the Jews. But in the providence of God, God spared our Lord Jesus. But the Herodian era from 63 through 4 BC, that covers the intertestamental period. I'm just going to throw these up here. I'm not going to, we might review this next time. This is not going to be on your test. But I just want to make the point that since the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome up until present time, look at how many civilizations have controlled the land. So the big issue today about Israel is, whom does it belong to? Do the Jews get it, or do the Palestinians get it? Now, those are the only two options that's thrown out before you. And the argument for the Palestinians says, well, the Jews took it away from them. It was their land to start with, and so they should get it back. The fact is that the Palestinians, first of all, were never a nation. Before the country of Israel, you had the British mandate from 1917 to 1948. The British were in control of it. Before World War I, the Ottomans were in control of it. They were Turks. So the British had it, the Turks had it. Before that, the Mamluks had it. They were Egyptian. Before that, the Ayyubids. Before that, the Crusaders from Europe, Christians. Before that, other Turks, the Seljuk Turks. Before them, the Fatimids, the Abbasids, the Umayyads. These were all different Muslims from varying areas of the Muslim world. Some more Persian, some more Arabian, some more Egyptian, some more Turkish. That never was there a group of people called the Palestinians. The Second Byzantine period, the Byzantines were Christianized Romans. After Constantine supposedly converted to Christianity, you have the Byzantine era. These were Romans who had converted to Christianity who were in control of the Promised Land. They weren't Palestinians. You have the pre-Muslim Persian period, the First Byzantine period, and then you had Romans in control before that. So it's not a simple matter to tell who the land belongs to if you were just looking at human peoples that occupied the land. It didn't belong to the Palestinians any more than to anybody else. It has changed hands time and time and time again. But this much we know, that a land grant was given by Almighty God to Abraham and his descendants forever. The Bible tells us that. and they are the only people who have a legitimate God-given right to the land. So I think we will stop here for tonight, and